I'm Lisa Rubel from 𝐞𝐫𝐻𝐸, and today I'm going to walk you through month 3 of the Medallion Magic Block of the Month from Sit and Sew Fabrics. Here's what the full quilt looks like, and we've already put out an intro video as well as videos for month 1 and month 2, and like I said, this is for month 3. If you are not yet part of the Medallion Magic Block of the Month, head over to sitandsewfabrics.com and search Medallion Magic, and you can grab the kit for this project. You'll get all the fabric at once, and then the patterns will come to you each month via email so that you can follow along and build the quilt month by month. And this is a medallion style quilt, and what I love about those is that we're building from the center out. So the first month we made the center star block, and then the second month we added on the larger star block and a couple just plain borders, and now we'll be adding on more borders as we grow our quilt. So there's no assembly section at the end. We'll just be building it as we go each month, and then at the end your quilt will be done and ready to enjoy. So let's talk about month 3. Here are instructions for month 3. We'll be adding a blue and white pieced border and then a hunter green skinny border around the outside of that. And what I love about this month is that we're able to use strip piecing techniques so that we're not sewing each piece together individually. And this is a great time-saving method for assembling units for this quilt and can be used in a lot of other quilts too. So let's get started. One thing I want to talk about before we start piecing is thread color. Now, in this quilt as a whole, we're using a range of dark, medium, and light fabrics. And it can be tricky to choose a thread color for that because you tend to want a thread color that blends in with your fabrics. And when you're sewing, like we did here, the navy star points to the white background, both white and navy will show up on the opposite fabric. So what I like to do is to choose a neutral color thread, either darker or lighter, depending on what I'm sewing together. So for this particular month, where I am joining a medium blue and a white, I'm going to use a lighter neutral thread. And this is the light silver Madeira Katona thread, color number 690. And if you look at this, with the white and the blue, you can see that it blends in really nicely with the white and doesn't stand out too much on the light blue. So that's what I'm going to use for this part. But for other areas of the quilt where I'm sewing two darker fabrics together, like for example these borders here, that would be a place to choose a darker neutral fabric that will help blend into both of the fabrics. So I will work with a couple different neutrals throughout this project so that I'm using thread colors that help to blend in with my fabric. So to make our blue and white pieced border for the start of month 3, we're going to use blue and white strips. And I've got a couple cut here. We're cutting the white strips at 2 inches and the Wedgewood blue at 3 inches, and we'll need 4 of each. And what we're going to start out by doing is unfold these and just sew them together lengthwise. So I like to do this with the skinnier strip on top because then I can keep track of where both the wider strip and the skinnier strip are. And you're just going to align the selvages roughly at the end and then stitch all the way down. Your choice if you want to use pins or just adjust it as you go, but you're going to stitch all the way down and make 4 of these strip sets that are the skinnier white and the wider Wedgewood blue. So once you have your strip sets sewn together, one of them will look like this, and it's time to press. And we are going to press towards the blue fabric, towards the darker fabric. So what I do for that is I put the darker side face up, and I'm going to just start out by pushing it back with my fingers. And then I will hit it with the iron, and because I had the blue on top, you can see the seam allowances are going towards that blue. And I want to make sure they continue doing that as I work my way down the fabric. Now, when you're pressing long strip sets like this, it can get real easy for the fabric to start curving. And just want to keep an eye on that as you press. Keep giving it a head start with your fingers, and then go back with the iron. And I like to do just little sections at a time. I feel like when you just go the length of the fabric, that's when it starts to really bow out like that. And there I am down to the end. And your strip lengths may not be the same length, and that's fine because we will be trimming these. Just going to go back and work my way down, make sure I've got it pressed nice and flat. There we go. Okay, so you're going to do 4 of those. So now that we have our strip set pressed, now it's time to cut it into the segments that we need. So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start out by trimming off the right-hand edge of my strip set so that I have a nice even edge and I'm removing the salvages. I like to do this with a smaller ruler because it's just easier to maneuver a smaller ruler than a super long one. So I'm going to trim off those salvages. And for every cut that I make, what I want to do is check that the line on my ruler is aligned with this seam line. You can see how it looks with your top and bottom, but your seam line is the most important here because the top and bottom will ultimately end up in your seam allowance as we join these, but this is the one that will show. So after you've trimmed off one end and I've got it square, we're going to be cutting 3.5-inch segments. So I'm going to line up my ruler, the 3.5-inch line on my ruler with that edge, and then I'm also going to make sure that I have this horizontal line lined up with that seam. And when I do that, I'm going to cut. What you can do, because we're cutting a lot of these to the same length, is you can actually take a piece of painter's tape or something like that and just put it on your ruler. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but just to the side of that 3.5-inch line. And that way it's just an easy visual cue to find it out so you don't accidentally say do one on the 3.25 line or the 2.5. And you know you're looking by that tape every time. So I've got my next one, I've got the straight edge lined up with my 3.5-inch line, and I've got the seam aligned with a straight line on my ruler, and I'm going to cut. And you're just going to work your way down the entire length of the strip, cutting. Now when you are cutting, this is actually cross-cutting, and when you are cross-cutting a lot of different pieces from a long strip, sometimes you'll find that this edge gets a little crooked. So keep an eye on that, and if you're finding that it did get a little crooked, what you can do, I'll show you. You turn it back to the way you started so that you're cutting on the right, and obviously if you're left-handed this would be the opposite. And then you're going to go back and align a line on the ruler with your seam and just trim, and that will get that edge square again. And then keep cutting. Ultimately, from your 4 blue and white strip sets, you're going to need 40 of these pieces for our pieced border. So our next step is to join these pieces together. And what we're ultimately going to have it look like is this, where they're alternating white to the bottom, white to the top, white to the bottom. And what's really nice about the way that these join is you'll notice that the seams are offset from each other. So you don't have to worry about having a perfect join between your seams because it's got that offset look to it. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is to make sure that the order of yours looks just like it does in the instructions. So if I'm looking at this top border, I want the white to be on the bottom left and on the upper right. And that the way you make sure that happens is to pay attention to how you join these in pairs. So what I'm going to do is set it up just like my piece border, and I'm going to start out on the bottom with one with the white on the bottom, and then I'm going to put one on top with the white on the top, alternating. And I'm going to put 2 pins in here. Okay, and that's a pair. So since we need 10 of these for a border strip, I'm going to make 5 pairs that I'll join together to make 1 border. So I'll join these in pairs, and then when you do that and open them up, you'll have the pair, and then you're going to join 5 sets of pairs together to make a pieced border just like this. So once you've got your pieced borders done, then it's time to talk about adding them to your quilt center. And what we focused on with the quilt center is making sure that at the end of each month, the quilt center is the size that the instructions say, because that means that when we go to add on the next pieced border, everything will fit nicely. So what we're going to do is sew one of these to the left, and one of these to the right, just like that. That will be our first step. And when we're doing that, in order to make sure that everything fits really nicely, we're going to talk about how to pin these sections so that it all fits. So for joining the piece border, what I'm going to do is find the center of the piece border, which is actually quite easy to find because it is on a seam. Mark it with a pin, and then do the same with the my quilt center and mark this border where that center point is. And so then I'm going to match up those 2 center points and pin. Some threads out of the way. And then I'm going to pin at both ends as well. And so when I go to sew these, I know that my border is the right size and my quilt should be the right size, so it should all line up very nicely. But if it doesn't line up perfectly, because things happen, what you want to make sure is that they align at the beginning and the end. So if one is a little tighter or looser, the top is a little tighter or looser than the bottom, say, as you're sewing, you want to gently pull on the pieces to take up that slack. So if there's some excess wiggle here as you sew, if you just pull very gently, it will what's called ease to fit. And so the border will fit onto our quilt center. So we're going to do that for both sides to add those to the quilt. With the side borders added, now it's time for the top and bottom. So the top and bottom pieced borders are the same as the sides, but then they have navy squares in the corners. So I've added those. I'm going to put them on. Top. And bottom, just like that. So we're going to add these in the same way, marking the center point on the border and on the quilt center and pinning those together, as well as in the corners. We're going to match up the seam line between the square and the pieced border with the seam line between the pieced border and the quilt center. And so those joins will help us to make sure everything is the correct size to keep our quilt coming together. Our last step for month 3 is to add this skinny hunter green outer border. And these strips need to be cut at 38.5 and then 40.5. So we're going to do my folding in half trick. I've got my selvage ends on the right, and I have the fold over here on the left, and half of 38.5 is 19.25. So I'm going to line up the 19.25 inch line on my fold and trim. Much easier than stretching the strip out to its full length and stacking rulers together to get the right length. So I'm going to do the same with the second strip. These will be the two sides. Move those, and then we're going to do the top and bottom strips, which need to be cut to 40.5 inches. So half of 40.5 is 20.25. So again, I'm putting the 20.25 line on the fold, aligning my ruler with the strip and trimming, and then doing the same thing here. And as I mentioned in the last video, the other advantage to cutting that way is I have a built-in fold line on my strip for when I'm pinning the border in place. So this is going to be my center of the side, and I'm going to put a pin there, and then a pin at each end, and then pin along here. And when I sew it, I'm going to keep the strip and the quilt center taut with a little pressure so that I can ease it to fit. And then my finished quilt center after month 3 will be 40.5 inches square, ready to add the next round of pieced borders. So we're going to do the same thing with the side borders and the top and bottom to finish up our month 3 sewing. So here's what the Medallion Magic Block of the Month looks like after month 3. We've created and added on this blue and white pieced border, and then an outer hunter green border. Thanks for sewing along with me. Next month, month 4, we'll be doing another pieced border and then a couple just strip borders as well. And just as a reminder, this is what our finished quilt will look like. This is what we're working towards. And I hope you'll join me next month for month 4 and keep working on your quilt as I work on mine. And if you're watching this video and you don't yet have the kit, head over to sitandSewFabrics.com and search Medallion Magic, and you'll find the Block of the Month kit. You get all the fabric at once, and then each month you'll receive instructions for that month, as well as a link to a video to follow along with me as I sew. So I hope you're enjoying this project as much as I am, and have a great day sewing.